Hi, I'm Corey Walmsley. I'm the CEO of Aurora Borealis Publishing. I'm also a writing coach, a book editor, and an author myself. So I understand every step of the way on the author journey. And today I wanted to talk about the fabulous phrase, long story short. So I am not a long story short person. If somebody is asking me about something, I am much more likely to start in on the story, give them the entire picture, get about 3/4 of the way through the story, and then go, this is turning into a really long story. But and then keep telling the story because I want people to be entertained, to enjoy it, to see every single piece of the puzzle. I want to take them on a journey with me. Long story short, to me, is just a sentence. It's just like, oh, hey, this is really what happened. And I'm not somebody who likes that from another person either, unless it's a really boring story. In most cases, I want to hear how this happened, how you got into it, where it got started, all of those kind of things, and all the funny things along the journey. If somebody says, "Hey, I saw this. How did that happen?" I want to be able to say, "Oh, well, it started with this. This is how this happened. Then this happened. And that's actually how we build up to this part." So now you understand the full journey. So if you're a person like me who loves to tell a long story, you might feel a little bit nervous when it comes to writing your book because you know you can't sit there and go on and on and on and on and on and turn it into, well, I know this is a long story, but because you need to make sure that you are capturing the attention of your readers. If you're used to talking, that's one thing. And usually talking, you can get away with telling a story that's a little bit longer than planned because you've got emotions. You're guessing, what people are thinking by looking at their faces. You're not be able to do that with a book. So if you're not a long story short person, this is what I suggest. Start out figuring out who your audience is and what kind of stories they want to hear. You don't want to start in on a story that they're not going to be that interested in to begin with. So that will save you in the long run. If you're given a long story and it's not something that they're interested in, they're probably going to turn the page, put the book down, all of that kind of stuff. That's not what you want. Number two, if you're a long story, if you're a person who likes to tell a long story, make sure that there are plenty of things in there to connect. You want to make sure that if your book is if your book is a funny book, if you have lots of things that you want to make people chuckle a little bit, because that's your personality. If you're a fun-loving person, if you want your book to be a little bit entertaining, depending on the topic, of course, then make sure that those kind of things are happening in the story too. You can put in like a funny thing you were thinking. You can say something completely ridiculous and that is related to the story. Put in those little snippets because when people laugh, then they're connected more to the story. Obviously you can't tell out loud if they're laughing when they're reading it because you're not going to be beside the person reading it in most cases. But that's something that you can do in the story. You can also put in little pieces that are going to connect. Make sure that you're identifying parts of your story that the reader is going to understand. Excuse me. So, maybe it's a specific emotion, maybe it's a specific process, depending on what you're talking about, then make sure that you have something in there that your reader is going to go, oh, that's like what's going on in my world too. So those are a couple really good ways to get through a long story that can't be a long story short. And then finally, of course, you want to make sure that you're telling the right pieces of the story. Make sure that the entire story is something that connects, that your reader is going to understand. If you're actually going through a story that is super long and it doesn't really make any sense to the reader anyway, then that could be a chance to say, long story short, this is what happened, because you do want every piece of your book to be something relevant to the reader. If it's not relevant to the reader, then it probably doesn't need to be in there. Even if it's something that's kind of helping identify you, that could be a long story short sort of opportunity. And I did want to say too, when you get to the end of your book, you've got a long story. One part that you do need to make sure is, long story short, is the back of the book. You want that to encompass the entire story. And I don't mean you tell the entire thing on there. I mean, you get some little pieces that are going to connect with the reader. When you're writing nonfiction, you want to make sure that they understand what they're going to get out of the book, because the whole point of the back of the book is, what's it going to do for me? If you're writing fiction, it might be a little bit simpler to be like, ooh, it's a feeling. But when you're writing nonfiction, sometimes you need to start out with a couple questions at the beginning. Is this what you're experiencing? Are you here in your journey? Things like that are going to help the reader go, oh, yes, that speaks to me. So the back of the book can be a long story short that actually connects with your reader. If you're working on a book, you're curious about how we can help you get through it, absolutely comment below or send me a message on my website, CoreyWalmsley.com.